Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. A big news day, maybe a pivotal one. The DOJ released its long-awaited internal review, as written by the department's inspector general, and it's packed with information. In a few minutes, Donald Trump Jr. will join us to respond to it. But first, what is in the report? Well, the document is more than 500 pages long, and parts of it are complex. And yet, within minutes of its release, the hairspray geniuses of cable news had it neatly summarized for the rest of us. It was a tough day for the FBI, they said, but here's the bottom line. A months-long investigation found no evidence that political bias played any role in this high-profile criminal investigation. That's almost verbatim what they said on the other channels we watched, and they repeated it nearly word for word at the top of every hour all day long, almost like a talking point, which, of course, is what it was. Keep this in mind. If you're looking to understand what's actually happening in this country, always assume the opposite of whatever they're telling you on the big news stations. And that's certainly the case here. They are lying. In fact, today's IG report is a virtual catalog of political bias and abuse of power. It is true that investigators found no evidence at all that Jim Comey was trying to sabotage Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign. No surprise there. Comey is a partisan Democrat, as he has explained repeatedly on his book tour. The bias, and there was a lot of it, was against Donald Trump and his campaign. And there's an enormous amount of that on display in this report. Trump is a loathsome human, FBI lawyer Lisa Page wrote to her boyfriend, FBI official Peter Strzok. He is an idiot, awful, an enormous douche, a disaster. He simply cannot be president. He's not ever going to become president, right? Right, she wrote to Strzok at one point. No, Strzok replied. No, he won't. We'll stop it. Keep in mind, these are the people running the investigations into Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton in the middle of a presidential race. It's almost unbelievable. But you know what's even more unbelievable? Peter Strzok still works at the FBI. The man who promised to stop a presidential candidate from getting elected is still collecting a salary at our most powerful law enforcement agency. If you're looking for evidence of political bias, there you have it. And if you don't believe it, imagine this headline, for example, say 10 years ago. Barack Obama simply cannot become president. We will stop him, wrote FBI agent Peter Strzok, who still works at the Bureau. Can you imagine? No, he'd be fired immediately. First Amendment be damned. And by the way, Strzok and Page were not alone. They're not even the standout cases in this report. The document quotes another FBI attorney wondering, quote, what I could have done differently to stop Donald Trump's election as president. That same official later describes himself as part of the anti-Trump resistance. For some reason, the DOJ is hiding that lawyer's name from the public. We do know he served on the Mueller team until February of this year. Of course he did. And there's a lot more in the report, hundreds of pages of it. It turns out Jim Comey used a personal email account to conduct government business, just like the woman he was in the process of investigating for doing the same thing. Irony alert. Hillary's secret server, by the way, it did indeed have classified information on it, and some of that information was obtained by a foreign intelligence service, at least one. Remember when we suggested that very thing and they scoffed derisively? Well, it turns out it's true, like so much. The report goes on to reveal that FBI agents routinely took bribes from journalists in return for leaking information. People have gone to jail for things like that in Washington, but of course no one at FBI was seriously penalized for it. It goes on like this. The FBI is out of control. The current director, Chris Wray, acknowledged as much today at a press conference. Luckily, Wray has a solution. Going forward, he said, FBI employees will receive professional anti-bias training. Now, that might not make the criminal investigations less corrupt, but it will definitely bring a heightened sense of sensitivity to questions of transgender bathrooms and toxic masculinity. So that might make you feel better. Fox Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge has been on this from the very beginning and joins us now with the report. What would you say is the sum of the impression you get of Director Comey from this report, Catherine?
Well, this is the report right here, Tucker, and it's, as you mentioned, over 500 pages long. And the bottom line with Director Comey is that the Inspector General found that he was insubordinate when he made that July 2016 public statement about the Clinton email case, where Director Comey recommended against criminal charges for the mishandling of information. And the Inspector General said that Comey deliberately hid what he was going to say from his boss, the Attorney General Loretta Lynch, and her deputy, Sally Yates. And there was no other way to describe it, but it amounted to insubordination. And I think that's important because for Comey, it's part of his legacy, right? He's done a book about loyalty. He's touring the country, talking about leadership. And this really is sort of a footnote or a bookend on his legacy, Tucker.
One of the headlines of this report, which we just quoted at some length, was the text message from Peter Strzok to Lisa Page in which he promised we'll stop him. Mr. Strzok still works at the FBI. Has there been any indication of whether there'll be consequences for him?
Right. So what we learned today from the FBI director is that they're going to refer some of the employees for administrative action. And I just want to kind of decode that for you a bit. Administrative action is not criminal prosecution. And for many of these people who are, implicated in the report, they've already left the Bureau. They've retired out.
Right.
They've just left on their own, or they've been, reassigned. Strzok is still there. And based on what we read in the report today, there seems to be evidence, as you mentioned, of this political bias. And if I could just say one thing, I think it's so important to pay attention to the language in the report. What they say is that they didn't find testimonial or documentary evidence, so no paperwork and no witness testimony, that political bias infected the decisions of the Clinton email campaign investigation. That doesn't mean it didn't happen or it wasn't there, but they're saying they didn't find evidence of it, right? So I think that that's an important distinction.
It certainly is, and thanks for pointing that out. Catherine Herridge, appreciate it.